Is it bad if I clap for myself? All right. So this is my workshop on how to make yours better. I want to give a quick shout out to Ashish Laroya for helping me with the outline and things. All right, so let's start with talking about me. Hi, that's me. I really like needlepoint and cross-stitch, and you'll almost always find me with something like this. I love math. I love it so much that I majored in it, and decided I don't want to program without it, so I'm learning about data science at the moment. And I absolutely love funny pictures of cats. You will discover this as we work through this presentation. But the most important thing about me is I want to help you. I don't want you to feel like I'm telling you that you're horrible. What you're doing is bad, because it's not. What you're doing is great. It could just be better. So here's some tips on how to make it better. But before I get to that, here's 3 more pictures with very important information attached. 1, the oboe, because I play the oboe, and I'm a chick. There is all of my information. Nicholle at obochick.com, and my Twitter handle is at obochick_. Unfortunately, obochick was already taken. Couldn't get away with that. So let's talk about the first thing that people see when they go to your workshop. And let me tell you, it's not you. The first thing that they're going to see is this. Now, I think the best one up there is the one of 1120 in room 1. Not really. These are all really good titles, but let's talk about the title. If this is the first thing that you see, I see practical network analysis. That actually sounds really interesting to me. Now, I did not go to this tutorial or workshop. I don't remember what it was. I just pulled it out of the handbook or the schedule for PyCon 2016. Now, I didn't read past the title, and if there are others out there that are like me, and statistically you probably are, you don't read more than the title, which means you wouldn't have read far enough to realize that this is an intermediate workshop. I would have shown up, and well, that would not have been fun for me. So when we title our workshops and tutorials, we need to make sure that what we're titling them makes sense. Also, words to avoid: simple, fast, easy. The reason why, if by the end of your workshop, I don't think that network analysis is easy or simple, my mind, even if I'm not thinking it in the forefront, I'm thinking it in the back, I'm really stupid. I don't understand this. This isn't simple. Maybe I should let someone who knows more about this take care of it. I shouldn't learn this. I'm not smart enough. Now, is that the case? No. No, that is not the case. What it is it's just we need to take a little more time. So please avoid those words. It will help your attendees a lot. So instead of this, let's try this. So an intermediate level guide to practical analysis. First thing on there is the level. It tells us that it's an intermediate workshop, which is great. Don't have to worry about whether it's a beginner or not, whether they read the description or not. They also see what the tutorial is about at the end. And I like to say guide, because I think of it like, hey, I'm going to a museum. I can go through this new exhibit all by myself and read all these things, and that's great. Or I can go on the tour. If I go on the tour with a guide, I get all the cool stories behind the little plaques. So think of it as you are the guide in the museum to guide them through and show them all the little cool stories behind your tutorial. So, who's going to show up? You're going to have the people who are clueless, never done computer programming before. They're here. They're really going out on a limb. Oftentimes, they're uncomfortable because they're out of their comfort zone. And then you're going to have the people who have a degree, who are already working in the industry. They kind of know what they're doing, but they're here to learn something new. When you're writing your workshop, you want to aim it towards the people who are clueless. because it's much easier to skip steps than it is to try and go back and fill in the steps you've missed. So if you have it written out step by step, the people who know what they're doing can always skip to the next part if they already know what to do. But if they don't know the steps, you're kind of in trouble. So what do you do if you don't have enough helpers? How many of the people in here have taken a math class? Yay, that's everybody. Okay, how many of you have sat down and taken notes as a teacher is up at the front and they're writing their notes out, and maybe they come up with a problem off the top of their head and they're doing it at the front and they make a mistake? You've been in classrooms when that's happening? Yay, everybody. Great. You've seen live coding. All right, now you're thinking, but I'm going to make a mistake. This is bad. They're going to think I'm stupid because I'm making mistakes. No, they're not. What you're going to do is you're going to show them that it's okay to make mistakes. I was constantly told, as I was learning to program, that colons being left out and commas at the end of lines is something that happens all the time. I didn't believe it. I didn't believe it at all until I had sat down and been programming for quite a while. So, if you're up in front and you're coding, and hey, look, a syntax error, I forgot this colon, point it out every time. Because by you pointing it out, it's saying, hey, look, it happens. It's okay. Making mistakes is okay. We really want it to be okay for them to make mistakes. And if you are up at the front making mistakes and pointing them out, and maybe even showing your frustration with, oh God, I've done it again. Like, showing that you're frustrated with it means that it's okay for them to be frustrated with it. Just don't aim your frustration at your attendees. Just make sure that you keep it here. So, okay, we've done this. Let's say we've got 15 people. All of them are raising their hands. They all have questions. But you're only one person. You can't answer them all at once. So what do you do? Pair programming. This is great, but everyone wants to do it. So I kind of take a twist on it. Normally, pair programming is 2 people, 1 computer. I like to think of it as, okay, I'm going to take everyone who has 1 year of experience or less, and I'm going to put you on this side of the room, and I'm going to slowly filter people out to this side of the room until I have about half of them, and then I'm going to take everyone else, put them on this side, and I'm going to pair them up. And so I'm going to have someone who's more experienced with someone who's less experienced, and I'm going to have them try and work it out together before they ask me questions. And by doing that, I eliminate about 80% of the questions that I'm going to get. And that will help me be less stressed out because I don't have to help everybody right now. So it helps. But the next thing is, why do people ask questions? And this one is really important. People ask questions because they don't understand, but they really want to. Do not ever tell someone that their question is stupid. If their question does not make sense, it just means that they don't understand what's happening enough to ask the right one. They're trying to find a question that makes sense to them. And if it doesn't make sense to you, you need to ask them more questions to find out where it is that they actually are having their problem. So maybe you need to back up like 5 steps and work your way through it again and try and figure it out. Sometimes you'll discover that, well, hey, I forgot to put this step in. And that's the problem. So please be very patient when someone asks a question. It's really hard to ask it. Whoa. Just happened. All right. Also, I really hate this phrase. And I really hate this phrase for a reason. So, if I were to ask someone to please Google a clip, I want you to find me a clip. Okay. Question for someone in the audience. What are you going to Google? Anyone? Okay, the number 1 response that I've gotten is they're going to look for a video clip. Okay. I'm not looking for a video clip, I'm looking for a hair clip. It doesn't matter how often you Google video clip, you will never find my hair clip. So, when you tell someone to just Google it, you're not helping them, you're not teaching them, you are sending them down a rabbit hole, and if they don't have the right question to ask, it is so frustrating. I actually gave up learning to code for 3 years because I was so frustrated because people kept telling me to just Google it. So please, do not tell them to just Google it. If you want them to Google it, say, hey, try Googling this, and you tell them what to Google. That is okay. You give them a direction, and then you make sure that you go back around to them so that you check up to make sure that they actually found the answer. So what if they don't ask questions? This is a big one. Well, the first thing that I try to do is I try to ask them questions. But there's a lot of people who won't raise their hand. So what do I do then? I love Post-it notes. Post-it notes, they're great. I'm kind of improvising because I forgot my Post-it notes and someone very kind gave me some. So, also, for those of you who are colorblind, writing yes and no on them, it's great. Best thing about these, I can ask you a question, and instead of having to raise your hand, you just take your Post-it note, you stick it on the back of your computer. No one behind you has to see it. The only person who can see it is me up at the front. And in doing so, they don't have to put themselves out there. You can say, hey, do I need to slow down? Yes, no. That kind of thing will encourage them to actually respond, and you'll have a better metric for how you're doing. I like to call it the poor man's clicker. Also, which is a good example of this, we have them here. Postcard, or the little 3x5 cards. Put them out beforehand. Most tutorials or workshops have a break. Have them write down their questions. At the break, go around and collect these cards so that they're anonymous. Go through them. At the end of the break, look at them. Read them. Afterwards, go through each one. 9 times out of 10, you'll find that like 3 or 4 of them are the same question. You just need to go through it again. So make sure that you have ways for them to ask questions that are anonymous. Means they're more likely to do it. Something else that I highly recommend, and I have several examples of this, if you're an attendee, have a book just like this. If you're a person who's writing the tutorial and you can get the conference to supply them, that's great. These things are pretty cheap, but they're great because I can take it home. I can write down any vocabulary I want. I can write down any notes that I've found. If I have questions, I can write down the question and then leave a blank space because there's not someone to help me out right now. And then I can ask it later. If I'm going to another workshop, I can bring it with me. I don't have to search through, say, my Google Drive or my Dropbox and find the notes from the last tutorial that I went to. It's all right here. I have it in one place. If there's no internet and I can't quite get to my whatever notes that I have online, I don't need it. It's right here. And if anyone wants to see examples, I've got all 3 of my books that I'm currently using. So feel free to come up to me afterwards and I'll show it to you. So here's an example of a really good tutorial. And I'm going to do something I think is kind of dangerous. Switch over to it, maybe. All right. No. Darn. Okay. May have just... I did. Can I have some help? I want to go to a web page, but I don't know how to get it. Okay. There it is. There it is. Oh. Ah. Yay, okay. So, this is the Django Girls tutorial. I've used this many times. This is probably the best Python intro that I have seen. Okay, but I do have one problem with it. So this is the beginning of their Python page, and I'm going to scroll through. Let's see here. We start with strings. Okay, I'm going through the strings. This is great. Going through errors. I'm thinking about all the things I've done. I get to variables. I'm like, yes, look at all the stuff I've done. And then look at the scroll bar. I'm not even a quarter of the way down the page. My thoughts are no longer, look at all the stuff that I just did. My thoughts are, look at all the stuff I still have left to do. My mind's no longer focused on what I'm supposed to be learning. I'm focused on how much I have left to do. And then on top of that, on the sidebar, I see all this stuff here. So we want to avoid that. I like to say that long pages are daunting. And I don't know. See if I can get the thing back here. There we go. Maybe. All right, how do I get these things back up? I'm there. Yeah. All right. How do I get this up? You did this for me earlier. No. All right, sorry about that. All right, so long pages are daunting. I like to say that the magic number is 3. You should have no more than 3 things on a page for them to look at the same time. Whether that's, hey, there's this direction that I'm doing, and then there's an explanation, there's a direction that they're supposed to follow, and there's a screenshot with an arrow that shows them what they're supposed to do. That's 3 things. Nothing else should go on this page. You should go to a next page. Well, then you're thinking, okay, well, instead of having this much, I'm going to have a book that's like really long. Great. Okay, that's going to be daunting. No, it's not. And if you think about it in terms of like a video game, video games have you clicking a lot, particularly on like a computer. They have you clicking a lot because it tells your brain, hey, something's happening and this is good. So the more times you click, the more your brain thinks, hey, something's happening. This is good. So short pages are good because they get to click more. The more they click, the more they say, hey, look at all the stuff I'm doing. Look how fast I'm going through it. I feel really smart. Whether or not they're actually doing a ton on each page, it makes them feel better because they can actually see the progress they're making instead of looking at the scroll bar with like a quarter of the way done. So please don't put a lot on your slides or your notebook or whatever it is you're using for your tutorial or your workshop. The less things that someone has to focus on at a time, the more likely they are to actually remember what you're doing. And now I'm going to stop talking to the people who are writing this and talk to the organizers. Please, please, please do not ask someone for a tutorial or a workshop with less than a month's notice. And I say this from experience because I was recently asked by a friend to help her write a command line and Git tutorial. We were told we would have 6 weeks. The next day she calls me and says, hey, they want me to do this next week. Neither of us got any sleep. We were both pretty frantic. I'm in the middle of a data science immersive program, so I had a huge project going. She's switching jobs, so she's at a new job. She's like, okay, life happens. I can't drop everything and do the tutorial for next week, but we weren't exactly given a choice. So we did it, but I can tell you this. The attendees were really frustrated because the first 45 minutes of our workshop was set up. Because we didn't have a choice. We didn't get to send out the link beforehand to say, hey, please have this installed. Next, neither of us are familiar with Windows or Linux. We had to set up both. We're having to teach ourselves on the fly how to do this. That's really hard. It's also really frustrating for the other 20 people in the room who have to sit and wait while you figure it out. So, that's the first problem. The second problem, if there's a mistake, the attendees find it, you have to fix it. The attendees are frustrated because they're constantly finding mistakes. This brings me to my next point. Please test it. Test it, test it, test it. When I was doing math education, which was my major, whenever we had to learn about, or whenever we had to write a lesson plan, it didn't matter if everyone in the class was doing the same lesson. We all had to have 3 of our classmates test or look over our lesson plans before we were allowed to turn it into the teacher. Not before we were allowed to present it, before we were allowed to give it to the teacher. Now, this could be that, hey, I want you to teach people how to draw a square. Okay, the first person who's writing it says, okay, well, you just draw 4 lines. The second person says, well, yeah, but am I drawing 4 vertical lines? How am I arranging them? The next person goes, so you need to connect them. The third person goes, well, yes. Well, now that they're connected, we need to make sure that they all have the 90-degree angles, because otherwise we're going to end up with funky shapes. The next person says, well, hey, they all need to be the same length, too, because if they're not the same length, we could have a rectangle. So it's just kind of like there's these steps that in our head we skip over because, hey, we know this already. But someone else may catch those steps. So having someone else, whether they're at the same level of experience as you, or less experienced than you, or more experienced than you, they will see something that you don't. So please, have at least 3 people look at it before you give the tutorial or workshop. And finally, have an exit interview or survey. I don't care what you've done for the first however long your thing is. The last 15 minutes should be the exit interview or survey. This is the most important part. You're thinking, hey, the entire thing I gave is important. Well, yes. But how do you improve it if you don't have feedback? Feedback is important. Having it in written form is even more important because the next time you look at this is probably going to be like 3 months from now. And there's very few people who have eidetic memories. So, having it written down is great. Another reason why it should be the last 15 minutes, instead of emailing it out. When I get an emailed survey, I think, I don't have time to do that right now. I'm going to just set it aside and I'll do it later. And then I say, see it again, and I'm like, oh no, I don't have time now. I'm going to do it later. And later never happens because every time I see it, I don't have time. So I just keep pushing it off and pushing it off. They've already dedicated their time to being with you. The last 15 minutes should be this survey. That way you have the feedback. And if you don't have one, here you go. Here's a template. This is one that I use. I ask that you copy it and then give it out. It works really well. It's a Google document. You just put it up, they copy it in, they take it, you get a spreadsheet with the answers to all the questions that you've asked. One of my favorites that I ask is, if I were to write another tutorial, what topic would you be interested in? Now, you don't have to add that to yours, but if that's something that interests you and you really like writing workshops or tutorials, it's great. It'll give you an idea. and you can kind of sort of test out whether or not it's a good idea. If you want this and you haven't written it down or whatever, send me an email. I will give it to you. So, what should you remember? Word choice is important. Try not to promise anything that you can't keep. So don't say that you're going to make it easy. Don't say that you're going to make it simple. And please don't tell them that it's going to be fast. It's just going to make them feel stupid if it doesn't work out. Write your tutorial or workshop for the beginner. Do not write it for the more advanced people there. Advanced people can skip steps. They know how to do that. Beginners do not. Find alternative ways to encourage questions, whether they be note cards or post-it notes, or even a book that they can write their notes in. Break it up. Magic number 3. Try not to have more than 3 things on your slides or book or whatever it is you're using. Test it, please. I don't like being a test subject when I'm trying to learn. Last 15 minutes belong to the exit interview or survey. And finally, I am more than willing to help you. Please send me an email. You can tweet at me. I'm more likely to answer if you email me, but feel free to tweet at me. I will get back to you eventually. I check about once a week. Are there any questions? Yay! So, question is, where do you get those plain brown notebooks? So I held up a brown notebook. That one I actually got from the data science program that I'm in, but I actually Googled that, and I think it was $30 for 100 of them. Don't quote me because this was like 6 months ago, so the price may have changed. But if that doesn't work, something else that works really well if you really don't have funding but you have enough money to just buy like a ream of printer paper, fold it in half, take a stapler. Congratulations, you have a book. So those work really well too. Okay. The question is, long pages are daunting, but isn't moving back and forth between pages and pacing worse? It can be, yes. But the less someone has to look at a page, or the less information on a page, the less someone has to search. So if I have to go back 10 steps and I'm looking at a page that's this long, well, I could be looking for one line that's in the middle of a paragraph here in the middle, instead of this much information, and hey, look, it's right there in the middle, but there's only like 6 lines that I have to read at a time. So don't think of it as, yes, it is frustrating that I have to click back through several of them, but at the same time, there's less information on each slide for me to actually go through. And it's easier to process. And then how do you show people their progress without demoralizing them? I like to think of it as reading a book. If I have a book that's 1,000 pages long, and I'm having to get through it for a class, I'm not thinking of, well, I have 400 pages left to read. I think, hey, I finally got through 100 pages. This is awesome. So don't, try to point out to them not the 400 pages that they have to go, but the 100 pages that they've already read. And the more pages that they've clicked through, the more progress that they actually see. So if you have one slide that has like 60 instructions on it, and then you have 4 slides that have like 3 instructions on it, well, yes, they've gone through a lot, but they don't think they've gone through a lot because they only see 7 things. Versus if you broke that down into 60 steps, well, hey, they've gone through 67 steps, and they can actually see that. And it doesn't matter if there's 100 left. They just see, hey, look at what all the stuff I've done. All right. Not sure I understand this question. So the question is, how best to mitigate category errors, non sequitur questions? I'm guessing that means, what do you do when someone asks about a question that doesn't actually, that kind of brings you off topic? I'm guessing that's what it's going to mean, so that's how I'm going to answer it, unless, yeah. So the way that I handle it when I'm in front of a class teaching, when someone asks a question that kind of throws us off topic, is, why don't we discuss that later during the break or after? Because we're trying to work on this right now. So, like, don't tell them that you're not going to talk about it. Just say, not right now. Yes, so I'm going to kind of summarize this for those who are listening. What she's saying is, when someone asks this a non sequitur question, it's just kind of, when they hear, we're not going to talk about that right now, they kind of realize how far off base they are, and if they're asking this question because they're trying to understand, they'll realize that they're asking it the wrong question. So one of the things that you really need to do is you need to encourage, while at the same time saying, okay, this is really not on topic, we'll talk about it later, and then bringing it back around to what you are talking about. Sometimes you need to ask more questions to make sure that they're not trying to connect the dot to the wrong point. Did I get that right? Yes. Yeah, and you also need to make sure that they know that it's an okay question to ask. All right. Are there any other questions? No? Okay. I'm going to be out there somewhere working on my final project for data science because my capstone is due on Wednesday. So if you've noticed, I've not really been socializing much. But feel free to come up to me, ask me questions. If you have more questions and would like help with a tutorial, send me an email, send me a Twitter, something. I will help you as much as I can. Thank you.